Welcome back to Design Notes, a show about creative work and what it teaches us. I'm your host, Liam. Each episode, I talk with people from unique creative fields to discover what inspires and unites us in our practice. I'm so excited to be coming back to Design Notes with an episode from this special series of 3 interviews recorded remotely with the winners of the 2020 Material Design Awards, where we explore exactly what goes into creating an award-winning app with Material.
We asked ourselves, what if we took all color out of our interface? What would we then choose to bring back? The impact on our default mode or our light mode is that it felt brighter. And the impact on our dark mode was that reduction of clutter, and it was more intentional.
That was Mike Scopino, design team lead for the KAYAK app, which won the Material Design Award for Dark Theme. In our interview, we'll learn how KAYAK overhauled their approach to color while working on a comprehensive and beautiful dark theme that makes a highly nuanced product easy to use in all contexts. Let's get started. All right, Aleksandra, Mike, welcome to Design Notes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Just to start off, if you could each tell me about who you are and what you work on at KAYAK.
Yeah, I'm Aleksandra, and I'm the Senior Director of Design at KAYAK. I have 3 cross-functioning teams I oversee: brand for product, product design, and UX design.
I'm a design lead at KAYAK on the product design team, and I focus primarily on our mobile apps and some of our personalization efforts.
And to start talking specifically about the app, I think whenever we're talking about the details of a design, it's important to understand the context and a lot of the historical decisions that have been made. So I'm interested in getting just a brief history of KAYAK's approach to designing its apps.
So when I first joined KAYAK in 2014, it was a very engineering-focused organization. And material design actually gave us a common language to use between developers and designers, not only on Android, but across all platforms. And over the last 6 years, our presence has grown globally. We went from 3 to 7 brands across more than 60 markets and 30 languages, which caused us to fundamentally shift the way we approach design here at KAYAK, because we do have actually a very small but very talented team for the number of locales and brands we support, which means we have to be very efficient with our resources and very intentional in the decisions we make. That's why we actually created a system with a strong influence from material design that let us harmonize our design efforts across all brands and locales while still letting the unique character of KAYAK come through. And material, it gives us a framework that our brands can use to define our core fundamental principles, and also help us make decisions when it comes to UI components and UX patterns. It has also been instrumental in making sure the components are in our design system aligned with components in our code. And that's how we know now our system is working great, because there is that one-to-one match. What's in our code is in our design system.
That's the dream.
That's the dream, yeah.
You mentioned using material as kind of a foundation for the system while also being really expressive of KAYAK's own unique characteristics. I'd like to get into some of what those characteristics are and how those come through.
Yeah, so our brand aesthetics are hugely influenced by the nature of our product. We are a travel company first and foremost, and we want to make it easier for people to experience the world through travel. But we also know travel planning can be very stressful. It can be overwhelming. And as a global company with users around the world, we need to think, how does our design decision affect a locale? So a good example of that is the amount of content and timing, and depending on the locale, how we change that. In some locales like Korea, for example, a dense amount of information actually creates a comprehensive view for the user and creates trust. While in US, where people prefer a more minimal approach and a more progressive revelation of information at the right time. So we have to take these all into consideration, and we have some key guiding principles that help us with that. First and foremost, we focus on fundamentals of our UX, which we think about it in hierarchy, accessibility, intentional use of color, displaying the right content in the right time in the user's journey. Secondly, we think about regionalization and inclusivity. It plays a major role in our product design as well as our brand visuals, like photography to illustrations to icons. So for some instances, for example, photography, we need to make sure we represent an inclusive community of travelers and also represent like an authentic and unique character.
Going back to something you said a second ago, just because I'm like a nerd for type design and typography, you mentioned this like difference in perception about information density. I think based on like these different writing systems, and I'm curious if you could clarify how you approach that. Is it the case that like you create actually different layouts for these regions, or is it more that you find the like in between point where you could set this type in either of these writing systems while still satisfying with the user needs?
Right now, we're actually like, this is our focus for 21, how to make this more efficient. Right now, we are changing the layouts for these regions. We're a culture where we A B test everything, and we have tried to test out the layout that's more, I would say, fitted for a US locale compared to a more denser layout. And we have seen how a denser layout actually is much more preferred in these regions. Like I said, Korea is, they value the more comprehensive something looks, not to be confused with clutter, actually. It is just density of information and you can see everything that you need. It creates that trust. It creates that, this is what I'm finding what I'm looking for, which is really important for their travel needs.
Okay, so as you mentioned, we are here today to talk about the dark theme specifically in Kayak. Kayak won the Material Design Award for Dark Theme this year. So I want to go in depth on that. You've already said Kayak takes a really nuanced and intentional approach to color in the first place. So that being the case, I want to know what you all think is kind of the value of having a dark theme and how that benefits your users.
I'd be happy to answer that one. For our team, we really see the dark theme in the apps as proof that we value our users' personal preferences. So as we're trying to make travel accessible to everyone, it's important that the product experience reacts to their needs and also just some of those preferences. So it's a visual preference, dark theme, but who's to say that we know why they're turning it on? It may be that they're trying to save battery life. It may be that they find it easier on their eyes at night. It may just be that they really like the way it looks. And so we believe the app should respond to that. It's a small way to demonstrate that we're responding, but I think it's an important one. And so it falls on us. It's our job to make sure that even though we tend to do more of our brand materials in a crisp white pops of orange. Our logo, Kayak's logo is orange. That we translate all of that in a meaningful way when it switches over to dark.
So I want to ask about how you approached this in the app specifically, and I want to start by talking a little bit about the relationship that the dark theme has to the light theme or the default theme, how you transitioned from one to the other, and how you think about color now, and how that was influenced when you started thinking about dark theme.
Yeah. Let me start with where dark theme started for us. It first was added to the app in 2019. That was an improvement we made prior to the release of the latest redesign. So dark theme came first, and it was actually a request from our Android engineers themselves. It was a side project. And that's really core to our culture here at Kayak. Great ideas can come from anywhere. Your role does not define your ability to have an impact. And so a lot of work comes from something like a hack week or a passion project that goes a little above and beyond the priorities or roadmap we may be primarily focused on. So without exaggeration, the Android lead really felt strongly and she reached out to me and she said, I want to do this. And like plenty of other features, my reaction was, all right, like that's great. Let's do it. And then we had to figure out how it was possible. And that's of course where material guidelines certainly came in to help us. So in terms of how we got from that first iteration in 2019 to where we are today, it was several iterations. And what we learned from shipping our first version of a dark theme is that it puts a lot more limitation on you as a designer. A successful dark theme needs to achieve the same degree of content hierarchy and color contrast as our light theme or as our default theme. But as a designer, you have a narrower range of color that you can work with. So it's in the fall of 2019. We'd shipped the first version of the dark theme. After shipping that first version, we realized it was all about being more intentional in our design. We needed to be more intentional with our use of color. So we asked ourselves, what if we took all color out of our interface? What would we then choose to bring back? And so that process involved us in design files, stripping out any color that didn't have a purpose. And what we found is that our surfaces became so much cleaner. The design felt more like it could breathe. And the impact on our default mode or our light mode is that it felt brighter. And the impact on our dark mode was that reduction of clutter, and it was more intentional. And as Alex mentioned, where we are applying a different approach for a certain locale or a certain region where maybe we do want to increase density, this change to reduce overall visual clutter really helped those variations as well. And from that early realization that removing quite a bit of what we had was the approach forward, we began to document our decisions, document the principles. A simple example is we call our primary color usage in each in the app. A simple example is we call the primary color in the app the progress color. A color that signals progress is afforded the highest level of visual hierarchy. It's always going to signal that the action will move the user towards their end goal. So a number of different guidelines like that. And to sum that up, after we had some documentation, we ran some tests on everything just to verify that we were achieving W3C color contrast guidelines. Everything was accessible. And we ran workshops with the rest of our product design team to educate them on how to use the new system. Big shout out to our groups that are more focused on branding and focused on design systems, as it was thanks to their hard work that we rolled this out into all of our design components in our system. And it's really that cross-team collaboration and the constant iteration that got us to where we are. We're on the 5th version of that theme right now. So the recognition that we've received from Google is a long time in the making. It takes this constant iteration.
I think it's easy for me as someone who works on material design to make the assumption that I did earlier that developing a dark theme is something that happens after your default theme and like somehow is subsequent to that. But it sounds like dealing with the constraints of creating a dark theme actually really changed how you look at color fundamentally.
Yes. As Alex mentioned, KAYAK does have 7 brands globally, and they all have different visual aesthetics. We were able, thanks to the work on dark theme, to create a system where the same rules and same guidelines scaled across all of those different brands. And that focus on making color more intentional as a part of our KAYAK dark theme is what really enabled us to become so systematic in all of the other brand UIs. To Alex's point about us being a small team in comparison to the global scale that we work at, this has really increased our efficiency and I believe allowed us to create a really consistent base to then begin to push the intentional variations for locales, for regions, and for a more personalized experience.
I can imagine organizing travel is a complex task, and KAYAK is a complex product, I think, as a result of that. And I can imagine that, like, as you're going through and figuring out where does color need to exist, what role is it serving, how do we apply it intentionally, that itself must be a very complex process. And I'm interested in a practical sense, how do you approach doing that? I'm thinking about people who might be listening who have an app that just has a default theme and they're really intrigued by this idea of like reevaluating their approach to color, but it can be a bit intimidating. So I'd like to hear about how you practically achieved that and also anything that you found or learned along the way that was surprising or unexpected.
Sure. We really have the material documentation to thank for a lot of this. As Alex mentioned much earlier in the design process of the company, it became a shared vocabulary. And I think that is the starting point for any team. You have to be able to talk about what exists today with your engineers, with your product managers, with everyone within the design group in a consistent way. And rather than just coming up with your own vocabulary, materials definition of things like surfaces and elevation and foreground, background It has so much context with it. It has all of these details on accessibility, on affordances, on interactions. It's just super comprehensive. And because we start from something that already exists like that and is a shared definition, the energy about deciding how to choose what color might indicate, your sort of primary progress forward, or how much to dial up a positive color that you use with a deal versus a negative color you use with an error message. That stuff is really then, it's your main focus. Using material design as a starting point takes away all of the other complexities about communication so that those individual decisions become where your designers can focus most of their effort. And at the same time, as we layer on our own color decisions or our own theme decisions on top of what is available to everyone out there from material, we're using the approach that material lays out for making this as available to everyone within our organization as possible. So it's not a magical thing that only the designers understand how to use color properly in the experience. We're trying to democratize what we've come to understand and learn as much as possible, because we see how efficient and how impactful it is when material does the same thing, where the documentation is there for everyone.
To add on to what Mike said, we use color and we think about the function of that color. So we actually call them functional colors. And we layer in what materials has given us, which is how do you use elevation, foreground, background, like all these elements. We literally have something like elevation 1, content 1. So we really pair up. And then honestly, that helped us create the theming we needed for all our 7 brands. And that intentionality, like when people are choosing color, they no longer can be like, okay, let me choose a random shade of gray, for example, because we know that actually random shade will kind of destroy the overall system and even hierarchy within color that we already established.
I think it's also important to note that other folks on our team put in a lot of effort on our color palette to make it accessible even prior to us working on this dark theme. Already we understood the different colors and the different shades of those colors that could be paired up to achieve the contrast necessary for people with vision impairments. And so we were starting dark theme from a place where we were already conditioned to have strict rules about color. And I think that, as Alex just said, not feeling as if you can pick any shade of gray every time you want to, or not randomly pulling a purple out of thin air, but knowing that there's a limited palette and there's reasons why there's a limited palette is a really great place to start as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great lesson that great design happens with great constraints. So I usually like to wrap up by asking some kind of question about the future of whatever we're talking about. I guess in this case, there's a lot of things I could ask, like about the future of KAYAK's design, but I'm really interested in this journey that it seems like you all have gone on of like thinking about color in kind of a different, more constrained, more thoughtful and intentional way. And I'm wondering if that mode of operation is carrying over to any of the other systems that you're using in the apps.
Yeah, like you talked about it before, in the last couple of years, we've been focused on just harmonizing our design system, specifically when it comes to color, because of our global growth. But this year, we're going to be focusing more on personalization and localization. And now, like, what does that mean? We have a clear system, but how do we now add those little differentiations when it comes to the brand? And you're absolutely right. Like, we have to now think and apply, how do you differentiate a brand but still preserve the system that we created for the colors? And how do you customize maybe some of the artwork that goes in? So that's something we'll be looking at. How do you make that difference and making sure that we're meeting the local expectation? Because ultimately, we want to create a product that adapts to users' needs and preferences, regardless of where they live and travel.
Well, thank you both again for joining me.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
It was awesome. Can I just give one shout out? I just want to say we are here to celebrate the amazing work of the app team and specifically the Android team. But like Mike said, there's so many people that have contributed to this. that deserve a huge shout out of years in the making and honorable recognition from Google. But keep your eyes on our apps. We have a lot of great stuff coming.
From Google Design and the Material Design team, I want to take a moment to thank all of the design award winners for sharing with me the details, challenges, and considerations behind each of their apps. It's so cool to see the great things that people are building with Material and to be able to bring that knowledge to our community. If you want to hear more about Material, follow @MaterialDesign on Twitter, check out our new YouTube channel, and you can read more about the awards at material.io/blog. Make sure to check out the rest of the episodes in our special series with the Material Design Award winners, and stay tuned so you don't miss our next episode. You can subscribe to Design Notes on Google Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. For those who stuck around, like always, I want to say thanks for listening. And thanks for sticking with me through the hiatus, too. It goes without saying that things have been complicated over the past year, but making this show is something that I really love doing, and I'm so happy to have the space and the clarity to start recording again. Until next time.